All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabriel Metcalf, CEO of the Committee for Sydney, and you are joining us today for a Committee for Sydney Live event featuring Andrew Constance, MP and Minister for Transport and Roads. To start, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. While we are meeting online today, and you may be in a different part of Sydney or a different part of the world, I am currently on the traditional lands of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people who traditionally occupied the Sydney coast. So our speaker today will be well known to members of the committee. Andrew Constance was sworn in as Minister for Transport and Roads in April of 2019. He has previously held many other significant posts, including Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, Treasurer, Minister for Industrial Relations, Minister for Finance and Services, and Minister for Aging and Disability Services. The way this works, as many of you will know, he will make his remarks. You can submit questions via the Q&A app on Zoom. I will do my best to sort through them and combine them, and we'll have a great discussion. Thank you for joining. With that, Minister, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gabriel, and it's great to be with you. Likewise, can I acknowledge country, and so critical that we do so, and particularly where I'm in Sydney today, but obviously in my part of the world with a large Aboriginal community, I do want to pay my respects to others, both past and present. And thank you for having me, and thank you to Uber for sponsoring, in a truly mobility sense, this presentation. But look, I thought maybe I can just rattle off a couple of things, but I prefer to get straight into questions and engage in some dialogue if possible. But look, first of all, thank you to all of you. Thank you to the committee. Thank you to your members. The responsiveness out of the community to this crisis, it has been unbelievable. And if you think that back in early March, we were staring down the barrel of a Northern Italy situation here in New South Wales, we were in trouble. We were in real trouble. And we're still unfortunately now seeing parts of Melbourne in trouble. And, it could happen anywhere, anytime. And I do worry about complacency. But the way in which our business community has worked through this in conjunction with our political leadership, it's been a first-class effort on everybody's part. As Transport Minister, recognising that normally I'm out encouraging people to get onto the transport network, I've had to do an about turn and say to everybody, look, we need to manage this. And we will need to continue to do so into the foreseeable future. And I think it's fair to say, certainly within Australia, but even more broadly at a global level, I think Sydney and New South Wales, the response we've undertaken to transport has been phenomenal. We've got the right team of people. We've been, cleaning trains and buses 3-4 times a day. We've put decals on seats. We have driven a digital agenda in terms of a response and giving as much information to people about getting around during the pandemic. And it is always going to be a step change with this. And we're making our first major step change on July 1 as we move from basically a guidance of 1.5 metres between commuters to basically a new arrangement where we can carry more people. We're over 1 million people that we're carrying at the moment. But we must recognise that, of course, the very nature of this virus and the very way in which it spreads means that we've got to be incredibly vigilant and careful. And I've always been very nervous that transport could lead to community transmission. And, our plan has worked a treat so far, and I want it to continue to. Back prior to the advent of the plan, we'd seen about 87 community transmissions in New South Wales. The plan came into effect mid-May, and since that time, we've seen about 7 to 8 community transmissions in the time that we've had the transport plan in place, and no identifiable evidence that transport has caused community transmission. So, that is just testament to our operators. It's testament to the commuters, and we've got to maintain that discipline. The big question I keep getting asked is, well, what's now going to become a permanent feature of the transport network because of this pandemic? And it's an interesting question because it's an opportunity for us to not only reflect on life, but also reflect on how we're going to live into the future. And for me, I have very much been hot to trot on pop-up cycle paths, and there is every possibility they will become a permanent feature of our transport network, particularly in the inner city areas. More pedestrian encouraged activity. We're basically saying to everybody, stop catching public transport trips for one stop. We're introducing a structural change to Opal to facilitate and incentivise people to, walk more, ride their bikes more, and of course we've seen the advent of, motor vehicle encouragement where we can. So for us, it's about providing a safe environment, about providing an environment where people can move about the city safely in ways that they haven't traditionally, and then at the same time, we're exploring close to 100 kilometres of additional cycle paths as a result of this crisis. We've put 10 kilometres in. We've changed speed limits in and around the inner city areas. We are going to stay the course here, and I think ultimately we can get through this crisis if we maintain the discipline. Before I go to questions, Gabrielle, I just wanted to touch on one other important issue. And in fact, Katie in my office reminded me of this before I got on the call, and that is everyone's well-being. I've seen stuff this year that I would never, ever wish on anyone, having been through one of our largest natural disasters and the effect that it can have on people. But I am very concerned as this pandemic continues that we've actually got to be kind to each other. We've got to look out for each other. We've got to openly discuss the mental health and well-being of our community and ourselves, and be very open about that. Coming from the regions, we've been through drought. My region in particular, drought, a firestorm, a small amount of flooding. We're now back in massive drought. We've got COVID pandemic, recession. It is an unprecedented time where our welfare can be so vulnerable. I'm very mindful that we have to all work together on this. This is not a time for our body politic to be engaged in tribal politics. It's not a time for people to be arguing. We've got to expend our energies in the right way. We've seen this country expend a lot of energy on big debates and not get the results. And if we expended any of our energies in the right way, we've had this massive debate about climate change for years. Well, no, let's shift the debate now. Let's actually expend the energies on the innovation and the way in which we need to drive change, and transport, energy, obviously other emitting industries across our community. We've got to be smarter about this. And so for us, this is very much an opportunity to be at this fork in the road and say, right, we're going to take the right path. We're going to all work together on this. So, that's probably just some opening remarks, thoughts, and really keen to engage with the committee.
All right, thank you, Minister. And we have more than 250 people on the line, and many questions coming in. So this should be great. And you have laid out so many topics that
sorry about that.
Everything is fair game, which is good.
My shadow minister's on the registration. So John Graham, if he's there, I'm sure he's got some great questions.
Yes. Let me start with a question about masks, and specifically the question of whether it's time to require masks for people who want to get on public transport. London, Paris, Berlin, New York, San Francisco, Singapore, and Seoul are all requiring passengers to wear masks if they get on public transport. Some of those are cities that have community transmission rates that are low.
Yeah.
You see places like Tokyo where they did a lot of things wrong, but because everyone wears masks, the community transmission has stayed relatively low. It has the great benefit that you can have higher loading factors on the trains and the buses and get them functioning more like normal normal passenger volumes. What are your thoughts on this?
Look, in a very disciplined sense, we've got to be guided by obviously the National Cabinet process and the advice of all the chief medical officers nationally and across the states. I'm not saying that the situation won't change in relation to masks. It could very easily do, but the viewpoint has been, certainly early on in the pandemic, we needed to make sure that we had enough surgical masks for our medical professionals in light of what they were confronting through our health system. And at the moment, the advice is, well, we have very low rates of community transmission, so there isn't that advice. Now, I'm not discouraging people to, through their own means, if they choose to, by all means, wear masks, but we don't have that advice. And I think, whilst those jurisdictions which do have high rates of community transmission have taken a very different approach at this stage, we haven't. The other thing which is really important, and we've got to be very honest about this, is that one of the big challenges we've had in this country is globalisation, whilst being a beautiful thing for many industries, and I think of our agricultural exporters and our mining and what have you, it has become obvious through this pandemic, the reliance on PPE, pharmaceuticals, even down to masks. We've had a heavy reliance on one or two countries around the world to produce everything. And so we have seen an incredible shift in terms of just even some of our local manufacturers responding to this crisis very quickly. Now, if we go to the mask situation, okay, as part of that, we've got to make sure frontline service workers, they're covered. We've got to make sure, certainly in terms of the wider community, their ability to manage the masks and what have you. And so, look, it's not something that I can rule in or out at this stage, but we've got to follow the chief medical officer, and that's the key thing at this stage.
Okay. A lot of questions coming in about trends in this immediate phase of the transition to recovery. Some cities around the world have seen true gridlock as people abandon public transport and move to cars. It doesn't seem like it's gotten quite that bad in Sydney, maybe because a lot of people are still working from home, but what are you seeing? What are you observing in the actual ridership and mobility trends?
Well, first of all, the big trend is that with so many people working from home, we at one point, at the height of the initial stages of the pandemic, well in excess of 75% of people were working from home. So, you can imagine we were running a transport network, and one of the great things we did was we kept every service running, we kept everybody employed, we kept our construction sites going, and we've seen a gradual increase of people coming back onto the transport network. So when we introduced the plan, it was about 570,000 of 2.2 million people who were travelling. We're now in excess of 1 million people who are using the transport network every day. So that gives you an indication the last month and a half in terms of people who are coming back to buses and trains and ferries and light rail. In terms of our road network, look, we hovered anywhere from around the 15 to 20% mark since the implementation of the plan in terms of the pandemic levels being 15 to 20% below what you would have normally run on the road network. So for us, we're still just sitting around that sort of pre-COVID level right now. So there hasn't been this, circumstance where, we saw a 20% increase in traffic volumes. So, we saw a very, very big drop, a massive drop in, reduction of commuters and road networks. What we're trying to do as we come out, though, is move everyone the inner city areas, I'm encouraging people to cycle or walk. And as I said before, we're actually going to restructure the Opal system to even put those incentives in place. And, so for argument's sake, we're going to offer a 50%, discount on intra-peak fares. We're putting basically off-peak discounts now, making them available on buses and light rail for the first time. We are, for short bus trips of less than 3 kilometres, we're increasing the distance fare band. It's that type of stuff. So people very much, through a price point, are also going to be able to reconsider how they time their day and how they travel. So the trends have been there, but we're still substantially well down on what we would normally carry. We're about to enter school holidays periods for the next fortnight, and again that will result in an easing of the pressure on the transport and road network. So I think we'll continue to monitor that. The interesting part, which I don't believe we've seen elsewhere around the world, is we've provided commuters with load data on their services. So people are able to go to their trip planning apps and see how their service had performed the day before. Throughout the course of the plan, we did have a couple of hotspots where we felt that there was too many commuters crowded on the network, and we got marshals directly to those areas to disperse commuters. I think there's been a lot of common sense applied amongst commuters, and we've seen well over 95% of services adhere to good social distancing through the first month and a half of the plan. So it's testament, as I said, to everyone's discipline.
Okay, a lot of questions coming in about cycleways. As you would know, the committee has been advocating for an accelerated build out of the principal cycle network as a perfect form of fiscal stimulus, projects which can be done by smaller firms and would leave the city much better off in the end. So we were thrilled to see the beginnings of the pop-up Cycleway network.
Yeah.
And so the question is, you seem to have just mentioned something in your opening remarks about 100 kilometers. What can we expect to see next in terms of the rollout of the Cycleway network? And do you have any goals in mind in terms of like mode share or something like that?
Look, I think we've got to continue the uptake of cycling in the city and walking. And it's a 50% increase in 5 years. So you will see more pop-up bike paths. We've put our first 10.3 kilometres in. We're assigning budget to it, and local government. It's not just the City of Sydney. We've got to do this across the entire city. And in fact, we've also got to do it in our regional centres as well. And so first stage is put the pop-up bike paths in, see how they are used, and we go from there. So my preference would just like to see them become permanent if they're well patronised and well used, and we're seeing a correlating change in mobility as a result. I do think also we've now got we've got speed limits being set at appropriate levels right across the city, and we're working very closely with the City of Sydney on areas which they want to expedite. So the areas like Castlereagh Street and College Street, Oxford Street, you'll see that we've already the council's put the pop-up bike path in Pitt Street, where they're also going to be doing some pedestrian work as well. And I guess in many ways it's incumbent now on us all to change our habits and actually start to use these facilities. The biggest issue that keeps coming up is the endpoint destination and what services and facilities are available in terms of showering and COVID risks associated with those types of amenities. So that's another challenge in this picture. But as someone who's got an e-mountain bike and a normal mountain bike, you don't get too sweaty on an e-bike. So, we might see a lot of that. Yeah. We've got to get out of the bike and into our business suits and ride our push bikes.
I can say from all my years being a cyclist in San Francisco that Sydney is not too hilly. And
it's nice and flat.
And electric bikes really change the equation because you can be in a suit and not work up a sweat.
Yeah, but one of our most highly patronised transport routes on the network, guess where it is? It's between Town Hall and Wynyard. Now, that's crazy.
Yeah,
right?
you can just walk that, mate.
You can walk that. So,
a couple questions about this. The New South Wales government has announced that a Metro West station at Pyrmont is under investigation. I believe it's the only station that is under investigation that hasn't been ruled out.
yeah,
Yes or no? So what can the business community do to appropriately advocate for that and all of the potential it would unlock on the land use side?
yeah, look, this is about land use planning, and this piece of work is being led by Rob Stokes. That's important because transport shouldn't be driving the planning. Planning should be in many ways driving the transport.
Mm-hmm.
So that assessment's being undertaken. I would urge everybody to get involved in the processes that Rob has set up to assess that where possible and continue to advocate. That said, though, it's against the backdrop of my aim to get basically a 20-minute train between the two CBDs in Parramatta and the city. Obviously I can't run an all-stop service between Parramatta and the CBD because that defeats the purpose of easing the pressure on the T1 Western line. And of course, also, in many ways, the Metro to Parramatta is the first stage of the east-west rail line to Badgerys Creek. So, we're very keen to obviously assess Pyrmont given the obvious opportunities that are there.
Yeah, okay. The state-federal financial relations review is about to be published, and will in fact be holding an event later this week with David Thodey to talk about the results.
He's been engaged. He's been engaged.
Yes. We believe one topic that will be debated is road user pricing as which is both a revenue solution, but most importantly, it's a transport demand management solution. What are your views? Is there a way to get this done that is practical, incremental, sensible?
One principle, and that is that I do not want to tax innovation. We need to encourage innovation in this country. So whatever is put in place, we have to accelerate the uptake in terms of EVs and ultimate autonomy. In a country like Norway, where they actually incentivise the uptake, and this is beyond the expensive Teslas. I mean, the highest motor vehicle ownership in Norway when it comes to EVs is ironically the VW Golf. So, I think ultimately we've got to make sure that with road user pricing as a replacement strategy for fuel excise as we move into a new world, that the timing, it's all in the timing and it's all in the incentives. So I'm very mindful of that. Yes, we need to build out the infrastructure. It's got to be paid for. We all acknowledge that. But like what I'm trying to do with electric buses, I want to put in the appropriate roadmap so that we can see the conversion of the manufacturing facilities of our bus fleet, the appropriate rollout of replacing 7,000 diesel buses because of the impact that it has on people's health. This is going to be a transition for our economy, which is really, really important. The key element in terms of it is it's not only about the innovation piece, it's also about road management, congestion, and how you can obviously deal with the obvious challenges there. So, I think there's a long way to go in terms of the piece of work that would need to be at a national level. Ultimately, if we're going to see practical federalism, we've actually got to humanise it. We've got to make it connect, and people can understand why governments might give up responsibilities, why they might change their tax systems, ultimately, given a recession like the one we're now in, you will always see these types of debates come up. But these are issues which have been around for a long time, and it's one which has got to have as much input from transport operators and fleet managers as treasuries, in a way. So it can't all be about the dollar. It's got to be about the innovation.
Well, that's a good segue to a question about electric vehicles. So yes, you could certainly design a road user charging system to incentivize uptake of electric vehicles. What else could be done practically to speed up the adoption of EVs?
Oh, look, I think, with the advent of mobility as a service, the very nature of people acquiring mobility as a service is changing. So therefore, they don't necessarily need to own the vehicle anymore. So
right, with Uber being prime example.
Yeah, prime example. Thanks for your sponsorship, Uber.
Thank you, Uber.
But I mean, the thing about this is that I'd argue that we need to be looking at mobility service charges for infrastructure in the future, probably more so than road pricing, because people will subscribe into the future. They are going to look at ways in which they can acquire their service, and I think that in itself will be a really fantastic opportunity to look at how we can hypothecate those fees and charges into the infrastructure, which helps us all. So we've got to be realistic about it. And so, I think, given that subscription level, there'll be no doubt a fee attached in it. And I'm talking a long time off. It's not talking next week, but, we will see that application. In the meantime, I think it's really important beyond, and just drawing this back to electric vehicle infrastructure, there's an opportunity for us all to look across the nation at how we can achieve this, because there is the very obvious changes that would need to be made across our community. We will see the advent of bi-directional cars. We will see, conversion of car parks into service facilities for fleets into the future. That there'll be technologies that we're all sitting here that we wouldn't have even thought of. Uber are going to Uber Elevate. There's another example of that. I mean, so for us, there's got to be ways in which we take our very, rigid tax structure and potentially look at how it can be used to incentivize, so that, as with all taxes, the broader the base, the lower the rate, but everyone makes a fair contribution. And that's where I think, whilst treasuries will be obsessed about stamping out inefficient taxes, we've got to make sure that we don't see taxes which stifle innovation. That's going to be the big challenge over the next 10 years for the country.
A question from Chris Brown. Minister, how can we fill in the Lepington link in the Western Sydney Airport Metro so that Liverpool and Campbelltown can access the Aerotropolis?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And you'll be pleased to know that a statement has gone out hot off the presses, announcing corridor protection for that part of Sydney, including the South West Rail Link expansion. So
wow, you heard that here first.
You've got that news. So for us, we're into the mode where we're now going to gazette corridors out in that part of the city. And, long gone are the days where you have to go and build tunnels because there's been too many homes built where you actually want to build and need infrastructure. So that's a really important step forward. The announcement today not only includes the north-south line, the South West Rail Link extension, but also the Western Sydney Freight line as well. So we're now going to move into the gazettal phase, which is really important. And I do think that, transport is about the future. It is about technology, and we've got to be able to better plan it. And that's what we're definitely doing around the Aerotropolis and the advent of the Western Sydney Airport.
Minister, there's been a debate for many years about connecting Sydney to Newcastle, Wollongong, potentially Canberra, by a better rail connection. So, whether it's formal high speed or as it's been called more recently, just faster rail to Newcastle.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people wondering whether this post-COVID cultural embrace of working from home might enable more people to live farther away in a variety of regional towns and cities, which would require better internet connectivity in some cases, but also would really be strengthened by better rail connectivity. So you could get in a day or two a week and you could work on the train. Is there any view that this might be a time to bump up those inter-regional connections on the priority list?
Yeah, it's a good question. Anecdotally, and I live 4 hours from Sydney, we're starting to see through our real estate and just even the whole lifestyle question, people now getting very interested in not living in Sydney anymore. They know they can work from home. And the lifestyle offers a surf at lunchtime or a mountain bike ride before you have to pick the kids up from school, and you're still able to do a good 9-10 hour day if need be, and you can do that from your home environment. So I think this has completely changed the thinking, and I think it will change the thinking around where people can live and how they live in Australia and how they live in New South Wales. So I think that's already starting to happen. I think we're starting to anecdotally see that, particularly from the regions, that people, they can sell up in Sydney and, they can buy incredible blocks of land affordably, build or buy, and their whole lifestyle can change. Now that then leads into the next point around connectivity, because you're right to cite that it's not only about the digital connectivity, but it's also about, the hard infrastructure that can sit alongside, trains and what have you. I mean, I deregulated all the air routes to try and drive regional air competition. So I've done that in the last 5 years. There's only 2 routes which are still left regulated, and one of those will eventually find its way to being deregulated, being the air routes and Moree. The other being Lord Howe, which you need to regulate. So when it comes to trains, we've commissioned the report through Andrew McNaughton, which has been done through the Department of Premier and Cabinet upstairs. They're going to obviously complete that work. My sense out of it is that we've got existing corridors. There's a lot of straightening that can happen where you can actually speed the trains up today. And we've just acquired a new set of new intercity fleet trains, which, if the tracks were straighter, you can speed them up and can better manage the existing network. So that's the first point. In due course, I think the country will get to standalone, potentially very fast train. But the way you would build it is very much Coffs Harbour to the city, city down to Nowra, city, Canberra City, Central West. So, it'll be a bit like the metro network that we're now starting to see in Sydney with the driverless trains. It will just start to roll out, start to happen. So we've already started the work. We've assigned budget to start straightening tracks. You'll see us trying to make the challenge head on in terms of the freight interface with the passenger rail interface so that we can speed up the travel times. And it is, in essence, about speed. It is about the travel times. But that said, I guess one thing we've learned through COVID is the capacity to be able to work from home. So it will change the economics around the feasibility of some of these projects, I dare say, into the future, potentially. And that's a good thing, particularly if we see more population based in the regions and more desire for people to come into the cities, for a day, a fortnight, or whatever it might be into the future.
All right. Switching to the other end of the continuum, let's talk about micromobility, which is a term that could in theory mean a lot of different forms of technology, but generally these days means electric scooters or electric bicycles. What you see in some cities is that
it's... Stop there. You're not allowed to put e-bikes in the same category as e-scooters. No.
Oh, no?
I've got an electric mountain bike. I'm not putting it in the same category as an e-scooter.
Well,
But I know where you're going. I mean,
yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of,
So the question is, look, for some people who, it's a great option in some cities, and you will have seen various cities around the world that have a pretty high uptake of people riding around on electric scooters. Generally, they go well in places where you can bicycle safely. They go a similar speed. They don't go too well on footpaths. They don't go too well with cars, but they go where bikes can go relatively effectively. What are your thoughts about driving a broader uptake of micromobility in Sydney?
unfortunately, I've been a bit jaded because I've been in quite a few cities around the world where I've seen them just littered everywhere. I've seen in places like Paris, it's just chaos. So I've been, obviously affected by what I've witnessed and seen. I've got to be honest with you, my viewpoint on all of this is to try and drive more cycling than anything first up. That's got to be the priority. And, when we saw e-bikes come in the way that they had, and the degree of challenge around managing that, basically, I think the hard cold reality is you need a lot of infrastructure when it comes to e-scooters, to the very point that you've just raised in terms of separation between pedestrians and, then we get into the issues around cycling and, of course, motor vehicles. You've got the challenges around how you might police it. And, again, everything in terms of how you might, through technology, manage this, it comes at an enormous cost. So I've got to be honest with you, my preference at this stage is to drive the active transport, drive the walking, drive the cycling as our number one priority. And obviously we've had a committee look at within the department, have a look at all of this stuff. But I understand yet people will want to privately have their own private e-scooter, and sorry, my younger brother lost his e-scooter in Singapore because they took it to Malaysia and penalised him because he was riding it down the middle of the road. But the culture's different. So look, I think let's get cycling right first, and then see where we go.
All right.
I'm sure I've disappointed some of your members, but in saying that, but I've got to be realistic, and I've got to, we've got enough challenges with active transport and accidents and what's happening across the network, and we're seeing some interesting behaviours, I might add as well. It's been incredible to think we've seen such an enormous drop off in terms of the number of people driving because of COVID, yet we have not seen any downturn in the number of people getting infringements for speeding. So, we've got to continue to work on our safety issues.
Yeah, and in some cases, speed limits really do need to come down.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're doing that in Oxford Street. We've done that in Oxford Street in the last week. I mean, so we'll continue to do that. Yeah, it's a real challenge because you want to innovate, you want to see people get around differently, and at the same time, you just want people to be safe. And safety's unfortunately got to be our top priority.
Changing gears, a question about the L1 light rail line. In our work in the Western Harbour, we identified one of the issues being that line is at capacity. I don't know what's happened to it since COVID, but before COVID, it was starting to be at capacity. And I think that just needs rolling stock.
It's rolling stock. So
if I understand correctly, so yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're going to, over the next couple of years, we'll see the acquisition of more vehicles. So it's a beautiful project because the uptake has been phenomenal in terms of people. But again, in the COVID world, we've seen passenger drop off by 80%. So we do have plans for the purchase. I think it's an additional 2 or 4 vehicles offhand, but we've got more on the way.
Okay, so that's a problem that's on its way to getting solved.
Yeah, it's on the to-do list. A few of those.
Several people asking about West Metro, which I think for many of us is the single most important infrastructure project. What update can you provide?
Yeah, look, I mean, look, it's going to be the project of the decade. We've just built, obviously, and we've seen the success of the Northwest Metro. We have now had it operating for more than 12 months. We've got City and Southwest, due to be completed in 2023-24. We're going to have tunnel boring machines back in the ground in late 2022 to start the tunnelling between the two CBDs. We're just getting on with the job. It's now going to be, I hope, an ongoing rolling program of works for decades to come in terms of Metro. And in terms of Metro West, obviously there's been confirmation of the station locations. We are just getting on with it in the same way we did with the Metro City and Southwest. We're in the business of acquiring properties. We've seen that obviously the issues around the stabling facility at the Speedway in near Camellia there. We've been able to resolve that. We're now very much in the phase of engaging with market and getting on with the job. And first point of call in that regard, property acquisition, getting all the planning approvals done and getting on with the build. And the tunnel boring machines will be back in the ground before well in advance of the next election at a state level. And I think that's a really healthy outcome. And it's a big build. It's going to be the biggest transport project in the nation's history. Like the City and Southwest, which I think will absolutely shift the city in an incredible way. This project will be a rail line for 3 million people out in Sydney's west.
Great. The experience of the COVID lockdown for people lucky enough to have office jobs and lucky enough to still have their jobs has been an experiment with new way of working that I think for many people has been quite positive. In terms of taking what was successful from that experiment into the post-COVID world, do you think there is a role for more formal transport demand management programs that would work with major employers to desynchronize commute times and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do that, and we've been doing that through Howard Collins and his team. When we put the light rail project, and we had this team set up called Travel Choices, and they would proactively go into business and help with the retiming of workforces and the like. Yeah, absolutely. I think if you don't have staff that are critical to your operation, they can work from home. I think a lot of people are choosing that, and either in a funny way they can be, just as productive because they're not losing an hour or two every day in the commute. Particularly when kids weren't at home being homeschooled. I think there was also a left in productivity as little Jimmy and Janie went back to school. So, look, I think it will change our lives forever in this regard. More flexibility. I think there are some dangers with it though, because it is meshing what should be our downtime and potentially exposing us to a truly longer working day with more issues coming up. And that comes back into the well-being and mental health issues. And, I was lucky because I live in a regional area, so I wasn't confined to an apartment in Sydney and unable to, be in a confined central location. I think as long as we're disciplined as human beings to maintain our exercise regimes, eat healthily, not watch too much Netflix, we can manage it, but it's going to be a real challenge longer term. And we've also got to be mindful. We've got a lot of people who live alone, and social isolation is an issue, and that's something which we've got to be very mindful. So the formalisation of any engineering in this path, I think we've got to be very open to businesses' way of thinking and how they want to run their operations. I don't think there's any hard, fast rule in that regard.
Okay. I have several questions that have come in about the Northern Beaches link, and I'm smiling because they are split between people saying,
Don't build it.
how soon can you do it, and isn't it clear you shouldn't do it?
Well,
So I've got both of those that have come in today, but
I'm,
I'll throw that to you, Minister.
I'm in the camp of how quick you can build it. All right. Couple of things. First of all, we need it. Military Road is one of the most congested in Australia, and it's dysfunctional. And you know, we've got a very major piece of infrastructure as part of this project. So it's in essence 3 parts. You've got the upgrade to the Warringah Freeway, which will completely change, obviously, the lane configuration, the way that the traffic moves through the Warringah Freeway and then onto Sydney's northwest in particular. You've got obviously the West Harbour Tunnel, which links Rozelle to North Sydney and obviously to the Warringah Freeway, and that changes the dynamic around Anzac Bridge and the Sydney Harbour Bridge in a phenomenal way. And then, of course, as part of this, we've got to deal with congestion, and no, it's not only a question of Military Road. And the traffic volume and the rat running through places like Willoughby, it's just ridiculous, and Roseville Bridge and what have you. So the government is building it. So, you know, I know to the critics, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but we're going to get this infrastructure program underway and continue to try and speed it up, because it's the best way to provide jobs, particularly in a recession. So, you know, we are going to get on with that. It's a great project. And, you know, there'll be a lot of young people, particularly from Western Sydney, that are going to be working on these job sites. You know, again, at the end of the day, we will, in essence, see an enormous change. And the one thing about the Northern Beaches link in terms of that tunnel is that it's also a public transport tunnel. It's not just about cars and trucks. The B-line is going to basically be able to come from all of the Northern Beaches, get into that tunnel, and then land at North Sydney, and we'll be able to get people to interchange onto the metro and get into town and deal with basically the bus bunching that happens on the bridge every morning. So this is a major piece of work, and we will be working to sign up the contracts over the next couple of years. And, you know, we've taken it to the community have voted on it, and we're moving forward.
Okay. A question from the land use planning world to the transport world. We continue to hear that I guess it's the former RMS part of your portfolio, in its role as the referral agency as part of development approvals, is a major source of delay. I assume you're not hearing this for the first time.
No,
is this an issue, in fact, and can anything be done? Yeah,
it can be, and it should be. So what we're seeing, and there's a number of referral agencies, and it's not just what was traditionally the RMS, where the timeframes and tick-offs from these agencies have been way too long. So we've now put in place a one-stop planning shop under Rob Stokes, and that is as much about having a central point for the investment community as is making sure that these referral agencies are actually part of the process, and they're in the room and they're getting on with things. We need to speed up our planning approvals. That is absolutely key to it. Doesn't mean in terms of the quality of the assessment that changes, but it's got to be quicker. So that's being undertaken by Rob. It's an important change. And again, it's designed to deal with that exact problem that's just been asked about.
Okay. Does COVID affect the budgets for transport in a way that is causing any trouble? And I think that's a question about if there's lower ridership, is the operating revenue becoming an issue?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to sit in denial. We've lost hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, but we also live in a state where the taxpayer picks up about 75% of the tab when it comes to the operating expenditure associated with trips. So, you know, we have a very high subsidy level in New South Wales, which again is important because we want to keep public transport as affordable as we can for everybody. And, you know, look, we've put some changes into the overall system, but it's not going to drive revenue. Far from it. I'm not expecting to see our revenue levels return anytime soon, but it's an important public service, transport in this sense. And the other thing is I think what we will see is because of the financial stress that we will see a lot of people under, you know, public transport is going to become a more important way to get around than potentially running a car or running two cars, or, you know, that whole traditional thinking will change. So, you know, look, for us, you know, we've kept every service running deliberately. We've kept every work site open deliberately. We're staying the course. And, you know, we've seen phenomenal growth across public transport in the last 5 years. And I think once we get through the pandemic, I would expect those levels to even increase even more so.
A follow-up on the Northern Beaches Link question.
All right.
As that opens, so some of the there's another way to get across the harbour. If you don't want more trips to switch to the Harbour Bridge to take up the empty space, would you consider the proposal that is, I'm hearing a lot more of these days, for converting some of the space on the Harbour Bridge to a cycleway?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the moment, you can't do anything. I mean, obviously, it's a major piece of the infrastructure, but in the years ahead, you know, let's just wait and see what the trends say. You know, I think the thing is, look at what we've achieved in the last 5 years. We've reformed the point-to-point transport market. We're seeing on-demand transport grow in a way that in many parts of Sydney, you know, you couldn't have imagined that it'd be as successful. We're seeing an incredible uptake in terms of active transport, and that will continue. So, look, I can't see it in the short term, but, you know, ultimately, let's see where the trends go. But I doubt we'll see it, but you never know.
It'd be pretty exciting, wouldn't it, to see a re-envisioning of this just glorious piece of infrastructure being reimagined for the age of climate change. Quite interesting.
Look, I think we're going to see some very interesting trends. And the only point that I would make out is that who would have thought our world would change with the advent of the iPhone in 2007 and the very nature of smartphone applications? Who would have thought that we would see the impact of Uber in the way that we have 10 years ago? I mean, so, you know, fast forward 10 years, who knows what we're looking at? I think in many ways what I do know is we don't know what, you know, is going to happen. I think there's things that will just, you know, absolutely surprise us. But, you know, at the moment, I want to make sure that, you know, certainly with our infrastructure investment, we future-proof for sustainable growth. And then at the same time, we make sure that we provide good, healthy lifestyles for people to maximise their well-being. And that's something which has got to be front in mind. And we're in the midst of, you know, something none of us have ever experienced. And it's time to reflect on the value of our lives and do that appropriately. And that means certainly every element of it. And part of that, of course, is getting around.
Minister, I might now just ask you to make a closing comment. What are the most important things on your agenda as you look toward the next phase of moving Sydney forward on transport?
Look, I think it's got to be the innovation piece. I've always been big on the innovation piece, and I'm just going to continue to be. I think we've got to innovate. We've got to look at the way in which we use technology to change our lives, and I think that's important. And certainly in the short term, it's to get through the rest of this year with the transport system working in a way that doesn't in any shape or form harm us. And, you know, we've got to be realistic around what we're seeing in Melbourne. We know that we're going to see hotspots nationwide. So, look, we've got a very significant focus on that piece of work at the moment. Same time, we're maintaining the infrastructure pipeline. And that too, you know, obviously in a downturn in the economies, you know, the best way to drive jobs is with public monies, you know, on these work sites. So we're going to, you know, continue to see that. We've got an exciting time at the moment. We've got basically, you know, the opening of the North Connects and the replica tunnels of the M5, so what's known as the M8 motorway. So, you know, we'll see that open possibly within the week in terms of the new motorway, linking basically the southwest in, and the travel time between Liverpool and South Sydney is going to drop by 30 minutes. It's going to halve. So if you think about that as a change in the lifestyles of people of southwest Sydney, that's phenomenal. North Connects will be open in the next month or two. Again, a huge change in terms of the link between the M1 and the M2. So we're in motorway mania at the moment in terms of openings, and these are good key missing links. And then of course we've got more work to do in the motorway space with Gateway, the M6, West Harbour Tunnel, and of course we've still got the continuing build of the link between the M4 and the M5, which links St Peters to Rozelle. So, you know, the road building component is very significant, but then the counter to that is what we're doing in the public transport space and the metro builds and the ongoing investment, over $4 billion in the existing rail network, which again is about providing digitised signalling, in many ways, you know, more innovation on the existing Sydney Trains network. So, you know, we've got a lot of work on, and that's going to continue. $100 billion of infrastructure being invested by the New South Wales government over the next 4 years. And I think that's a testament to, you know, the community and what needs to happen and the desire of people to have a more workable state. So, you know, it's exciting. And I think with a recession caused by a pandemic, it couldn't be more important.
All right, Minister, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us today. I really want to thank Uber, who is a great member of the committee, of course, but also is the sponsor of our mobility event series. So thanks to Uber. And then thank you to everybody who joined today. We had a huge crowd on this, and I know I only got through a small portion of the questions, but I think we learned a lot. I'll see you all at the next Committee for Sydney Live.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Thank you, Minister.